Hi, everyone. It is Monday afternoon now of the seventh week of the course. The primary assignment for this week is the review and the final submission of the innovation memo. And while I have covered the instructions and the guidelines and the tips for this innovation memo several times in several different ways, I wanted to do it one last time so you could have everything together and easy to review. Now, I'm going to try to keep this at 10 minutes and keep it as concise as possible. I'm going to place it in announcements. I'm going to place it in the discussion area as well, so you can see it in two places. And if I remember, I will even send it to you. Okay, so I have 4 or 5 precise points to make. The first one is, as you're doing the final version of your innovation memo, please be sure to remember and follow the scenario, the guidelines, the instructions very carefully. Okay, those are put concisely as follows. First of all, you are proposing reform or an innovation for your organization as you experience it. Okay, what that means is that you are a middle-level manager writing to a supervisor that you know more or less well. That has some consequences. The first consequence is your innovation itself needs to be narrowed in scope to focus on something that you would be doing as a middle-level manager. So by definition here, and in terms of the assignment, you want to avoid broad generalities, meaning massive changes in planetary software, innovations that would involve the whole United States. While I do conceive that maybe you might use a sentence or two of this broad nature for context, by and large, the thrust of your paper is for things that you would be working on as a middle-level manager. Okay, so that's the one thing. The second thing is, that is, the first thing is narrow the scope. Keep it as narrow as possible. The second thing has to do with your supervisor. Now, the idea here is that you are writing for someone who, put bluntly, knows the company better than you do, and in general will have much more experience with the company than you do. That means you do not have to do any general background about historical things, either history in general or the company. If you, once again, as I was saying, if you want to do that for context, that's fine, but keep it under 2 sentences. Okay, and once again, speaking very bluntly, the kinds of people, and in particular a supervisor, reading an innovation memo like this is just looking for the innovation. They don't need any of this other stuff. They will just quickly run out of patience. So focus is very important. Okay, so, and then as I'm saying, you could also assume that they know the material. Okay, so that's the second thing. And that is, you can assume the considerable, if not close to perfect knowledge of your innovation, of the company, on the part of the supervisor. Now, the degree of formalities, that's completely, as I've said many times, is completely up to you. I mean, you can write it as though it's almost to a friend, or you can be kind of distanced and glacial. That just depends. I mean, there's many different kinds of relationships with supervisors. I'm not looking for any in particular. Okay, now, the third major point that I want to make is it has to do with the focus again, but the focus on a place. And this is something that is very easy to forget about in a writing class like this, because most of you are used to writing college term papers. And while this is a college term paper, it is also and above all a professional format, as I've said, that you will be using hundreds if not thousands of times in your career. And in practically every case, it will be focused on precise geographical locations. Now, in principle, I mean two things by this. When I speak of geographical location in this report, in the first place, I'm talking about identifying where you're writing from. Okay, keeping in mind that your supervisor, while she knows you, she might forward the memo to someone who does not. So you have to be very, very precise. Another issue that I see popping up has to do with locating either where you're writing from or referencing people in your organization. This has to be done very carefully. The thing that you don't want to say is, I'll use the IT department. Okay, first of all, IT is too broad. Businesses don't have IT departments anymore. They will always be drilled down into something very particular. Okay, and the same, if your innovation is about, as the example that I've been using indicates, about working from home for 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 employees, you want to name them, name their jobs, and name where they work. If your organization has 5 different locations in metropolitan New York or metropolitan Washington, your supervisor might not really be completely clear about where they are, and she needs to know. Now, okay, so that's one part of the localization. The other part of the localization has to do with where the innovation is going to take place. Now, this has to be completely tied down. Otherwise, the supervisor or her supervisors won't know where you're referring to. Okay, so this has to be completely precise. Now, there's 2 ways of coming up with this local information, and both are fine. And I'm not very strict on this. It just has to be in there. Otherwise, the proposal is too vague and too open-ended. So the 2 sources of the placing are first just fictionalization. You just make it up. You can say, well, my 3 coworkers in part of the HR department, and just name where they work or name them. And once again, fictionalizing is fine, is absolutely okay. If it's a case where you need to do a little bit of research, that's fine. Go ahead and do the research. And this does not have to be long-term, in-depth research. Just, a quick look by Googling or Wikipedia or something like that is absolutely fine. Okay, so that has to do with a place. I think it's number 4 here. The next important thing is the time. I know this is very difficult to remember, and it's the sort of thing that would generally not appear in a college paper. Okay, because college papers are sort of written for eternity. They're not written for a precise length of time, which is exactly one of the main aspects of writing at work. Everything is time focused. If you're doing an innovation, your supervisor needs to know when it's going to start, when it's going to end, because all financial indications will be conditioned by that. Secondly, scheduling issues will depend on that. Thirdly, the discussions about the start date will depend on what you project. If you don't project anything, it looks indecisive. Okay, so be very careful about time. The same thing. You can do either a little bit of research on this, or you can fictionalize any sort of rational guess is fine. Once again, I'm not at all particular about, whether it's 2 years or 18 months or 9 months or 7 months. Those are all fine with me, but I want to see something there. Okay, because that's part of this formatting. I want to very quickly, in the few minutes remaining here, talk about the structure. And I said this at least twice before, but let me do it again. First of all, the structure of this is very simple, and you want to make sure the reader can sight scan it. Okay, meaning you're going to have a frame where you establish what you're going to say and what has been said. This is not so much different from a college paper. However, the introductory statement has a little bit of a different sense, in a wider sense, and a more interesting sense, and that is if the supervisor to whom you address this is going to either forward it or have someone else read it, which happens like most of the time actually, they need to know, that is, your supervisor needs to know what it is and who would be the expert in this. Okay, so that's why you really want to have concise, contextualizing statement on it. Okay, so the middle part of the paper basically is going to have, in most cases, two big areas. Just think of it in terms of two X's. Okay, the first part of the body of the paper will be a description of the innovation. Usually this is in 3 parts. And you might say, well, it really has 6 parts, or it only has 2 parts. It's kind of, for ease of reading, best to put 3. Okay, there's something more I want to say about this, but I'll say it in a second. Okay, so that's the first part. Make sure every one of your descriptions of the innovation is about the use of the innovation at a particular place. Okay, the same thing. You're not writing a general philosophical or historical paper. You're suggesting an innovation that is going to be used by specific people. Same thing. A little research is okay. Fictionalizing is fine. Now, the second part, so that's the first X, is the innovation itself. The second X is the benefits or the use of the innovation to the organization. And you can be very simple here. Same thing, dividing it into 3 benefits. However, make sure those benefits have place and time indicators, because this is what your supervisor is interested in. She's going to, frankly, know the theory. In very few cases are you going to surprise her. Okay, that's all but impossible in most business environments. However, the use of something and the advantages of something are something that a middle-level employee can contribute all the time. Okay, and does all the time. Now, let me sort of very, very quickly conclude. This is a very important format in terms of the form, in terms of the content. It's not very hard. However, it's extremely precise and needs to be tight. Okay, that's why we're taking a month to do it, and we're doing basically a whole series of rewrites on it. And by and large, you're doing really well. You're exactly where you should be. No one does this perfectly the first time. It is impossible. No one in the history of anything has just sat down and written a perfect innovation. Personally, I've written probably thousands of these. It still took me a year or so to kind of learn how to do it. The other thing that you want to keep in mind, and this is a hard thing, this is something I'm going to talk to you on video again later in the day about it. Keep in mind that one of the main differences between academic and professional writing is in academic writing, it's basically in most cases, a one-shot deal. Okay, you hand it in, you get a grade in most cases. Okay, professional writing is not like that. If your supervisor doesn't like something, or if there's minor issues in it, she'll just kick it back to you. It's no big deal. And there's like the fear of failure and this fear of, oh, I'm getting a bad grade, doesn't really enter very much in professional